27 years ago, on the outskirts of Charleston, a young woman named Laura Caldwell vanished the moment she stepped inside her own home, disappearing without a trace and leaving her family shattered in grief and despair. Authorities quickly zeroed in on a shuttle driver who had previously frightened Laura, but with no body, no clear evidence, and virtually no leads to follow, the investigation ground to a complete halt. Yet over all those long years, a handful of investigators could never let the case go, clinging to the gut feeling that the truth was still buried somewhere in the forgotten details. Then one day, while re-examining old Polaroid photos from the scene, they spotted a tiny detail everyone had missed. A detail powerful enough to flip the entire investigation on its head and shock anyone who thought this case had died long ago. Before we dive into this twist-filled story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit subscribe to keep following more unsolved mysteries. In late fall of 1998, the suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Charleston, West Virginia, was wrapped in the thick, heavy atmosphere of approaching winter, with the Appalachian ridges nearly stripped of leaves, exposing bare branches etched against a gray sky. Scattered homes lined the narrow road leading into the Caldwell neighborhood, where families lived quietly amid the changing season. The weak late-day sunlight fell across lawns, already turned yellow and brittle, leaving the hazy feeling of an afternoon about to fade. Against that backdrop, Laura Caldwell came home after a long day, crossed the backyard, and stepped inside through the familiar door that led into the kitchen. Her movements blended into the neighborhood's inherent stillness, drawing no attention. That was the last time anyone saw her in the place where she was supposed to be every day. As darkness fell and lights began flickering on in the surrounding homes, Ethan Caldwell returned. He opened the door and stepped inside, expecting the familiar sound of his wife's footsteps or voice drifting from somewhere in their small house. But the space was completely silent. Not finding Laura in the living room, he moved to the kitchen, looked around, and called her name. No answer. Ethan continued checking the bedroom, bathroom, laundry room, then hurried out to the backyard to see if she might be doing something outside, but that area showed no sign she had just left. Unease drove him back inside for another sweep, opening every closet door, peering into every corner even though he knew the chances of finding anything were slim. He checked the garage, the porch, the trash area, then walked around the house on instinct, like someone desperately trying to deny the worst possibility. When every searchable spot was empty, and there was no indication Laura had simply gone somewhere without telling him, Ethan stood in the darkening house and realized her disappearance was no longer in the realm of ordinary explanations. After a few seconds of hesitation, pushed by growing fear, he grabbed the landline and dialed 911, reporting that his wife was missing and he couldn't find her anywhere in or around the house. The information from Ethan Caldwell's emergency call was routed by the 911 system to the Kanawha County Sheriff's Department and immediately flagged as high priority because it involved a missing person case in a suburban neighborhood occurring late in the evening. The Sheriff's Office Duty Unit received the initial data from 911, including the victim's full name, the Caldwell address, a description of the situation Ethan reported, and the time he discovered his wife's unusual absence. After reviewing the basic information and assessing the need for an immediate response, the duty unit dispatched the nearest patrol team to the scene. The first patrol car, lights flashing, sped to the Caldwell area down the normally quiet suburban road in the Appalachian foothills, where light mostly came from scattered porch lights. Upon arrival, the officers met Ethan at the front door and conducted the initial verification step to confirm the caller was the homeowner and that no immediate threat existed in the area. Ethan was asked to recount the entire incident systematically: when he left the house, when he returned, every area he had already searched inside and in the yard, and what made him certain Laura hadn't simply gone somewhere without telling him. The officers recorded his statement according to standard initial intake procedure, paying close attention to details about the victim's daily routine to determine whether the situation showed clear signs of abnormality. After verifying the reporting party's account, the response team began documenting the overall condition of the house, starting at the front door, checking for any signs of forced entry or anything unusual, then moving through the living room, kitchen, hallway, bedroom, and other living areas. Each location was observed for any major disturbance, signs of a rushed departure, or objects moved out of place. Outside, the backyard and walkways were given a general visual sweep, noting the condition of the grass, soil, and outdoor items. The officers recorded everything in the initial scene approach report, ensuring every element present at the time of arrival was accurately preserved to prevent future data loss. Once the on-site assessment was complete, the response team compiled everything they had gathered. Ethan's initial statement, the actual condition of the house, the victim's unexplained absence, and the lack of any clear indication that the victim had left voluntarily. From there, they formally opened a case file under the category Missing Person. Laura Caldwell, a local-level missing person report. The file included the victim's identifying information, demographic details, the last known sighting time, the circumstances under which the reporting party discovered the absence, and the initial scene observation. All information was entered into the Kanawha County Case Management System to serve as the foundation for subsequent investigative steps. Immediately after the missing person file was created and initial information recorded, the response team moved to the primary scene survey phase to identify any signs that could guide the next steps. The goal at this stage was not to collect evidence or draw conclusions, but simply to document the physical condition around the area where the victim was last seen in order to ensure no potentially critical detail was overlooked later. The officers began at the back door, the only confirmed entry point Laura had used before disappearing. They examined the step surface, door edge, frame, and common contact points, noting general condition, cleanliness, dust or dirt marks, or minor changes in the paint, but without touching anything to avoid altering the scene. Moving into the backyard, they conducted a broad visual scan, focusing on the ground and grass, since those areas often retain signs of movement or dragging in missing person cases. Several spots showed light disturbance, grass pressed down differently from surrounding areas, patches of underlying soil more compacted or showing slight lateral skid marks. These details weren't enough to conclude anything, but per procedure they were photographed and described in the scene report. To ensure accuracy for future examination, the officers placed small marker stakes at points where soil or grass appeared irregular, including areas of uneven compression, exposed dirt patches, or surfaces that looked recently shifted. Such marks could occur naturally from routine activity, animal movement, or weather, but they could also relate to the victim's or another person's movement. The markers made it easy for investigators to return once more data was available or the search area expanded. Additionally, the path from the backyard to the yard's edge was checked for bent grass, disturbed dry leaves, or any unusual directional signs, though everything was only noted, not deeply analyzed. The officers continued around the entire rear perimeter of the Caldwell property, examining small clusters of trees, gaps between fences and the yard edge, and looking for any standout shoe prints. If prints were visible in the soil, they were photographed for overall shape, but not measured or sampled at this stage. All actions followed non-intervention survey protocol: no evidence collection, no moving objects, no impact on soil or landscaping. This preserved the entire scene in its original state to avoid skewing later analysis. Upon completing the full documentation process, the response team compiled the marked locations, established their relative coordinates within the property, and prepared a preliminary report on the condition of the rear yard area to hand over to the dedicated investigative unit. These records were stored in the case file as the first scene benchmark for all future comparative analysis. With the initial survey fully concluded, the officers could move to the next phase, establishing the time window during which Laura Caldwell may have disappeared, the key factor in shaping the entire direction of the investigation. To start, they gathered information about Laura's normal activities on the day of the incident, including when she left work, her usual route home, any regular stops at stores or gas stations, and whether any appointments had been scheduled but not kept. This data was compiled from Ethan's statement, Laura's co-workers, and any personal notes found at the house. Understanding her behavior before the disappearance helped establish a baseline for when she was actually at home. Analysis of this information showed Laura had no extended work hours that day, no evening plans, and that returning home in the afternoon was consistent with her routine. After finishing the victim activity portion, investigators clarified Ethan Caldwell's timeline to pinpoint exactly when he left and returned. Using Ethan's statement plus verifiable timestamps from his work schedule or coworker confirmation, police built a provisional timeline confirming he left in the morning, did not return during the day, and only came back in the evening when he discovered Laura was gone. For accuracy, officers re-asked Ethan about small details: exact time he left the office, route taken, usual travel time, and anything that could have altered his arrival, like traffic or stops along the way. From this data, they created a cross-reference timeline, identified gaps in Ethan's movements, and assessed whether those gaps overlapped with Laura's last known sighting. With data on when Laura arrived home and when Ethan returned, officers narrowed the disappearance window. Logic dictated the victim was last seen in the afternoon and the absence discovered in the evening, creating a limited same-day window with no record of her leaving or appearing elsewhere. To tighten it further, they factored in fading natural light, that day's weather, and Laura's typical afternoon habits. Her arrival time became the start point of the disappearance window, while the moment Ethan opened the door and realized she was missing became the end point. By cross-referencing these two events with daily activity data, police constructed a workable time frame, a gap where the disappearance likely occurred, and the foundation for investigating whether anyone had accessed the house during that period. Immediately after establishing the possible disappearance window for Laura Caldwell, the scene team shifted to canvassing the surrounding neighborhood to gather indirect information from nearby residents. This was a critical step to determine whether anyone had observed unusual activity during the identified time frame. Officers were paired up and assigned segments of road and clusters of homes within a radius appropriate for the low-density suburban area. They began knocking on doors and asking a standardized set of questions to ensure collected data could later be compared and compiled easily. Each household was asked whether they saw Laura that afternoon, heard unusual noises from the Caldwell backyard or side of the house, noticed any strangers walking in the area, observed unfamiliar vehicles stopping near the Caldwell home or moving slowly through the neighborhood, or heard sounds like a door slamming, footsteps, or an engine during the relevant time. Questions were kept open-ended so residents could describe freely without being led. Some residents said they weren't home that afternoon's evening, others noticed nothing unusual, and a few offered vague reports, such as hearing faint noises behind the fence, seeing the backyard light come on at an odd time, or hearing a vehicle pass faster or slower than the usual quiet neighborhood pace. Every piece of information, no matter how minor or seemingly irrelevant, was recorded in full because in missing person cases such details can become significant when combined with other data sources. Households directly adjacent to the Caldwells were questioned more thoroughly about their own activities that afternoon, whether they were in their yard, used the back door, had dogs that might react to strange noises, or saw any movement in the space between the two yards. Officers also noted homes that were empty during the canvass and left contact requests in case residents had been present during the incident or could check with family members who might have seen something. The canvass went beyond visual sightings to include sound factors and residents' daily habits, for example, who regularly sat near windows facing the Caldwell house, who walked pets routinely, or who could see the street from a higher vantage point. After gathering information from every home around the Caldwells, the team compiled the data into three main categories. The first group reported hearing or seeing nothing relevant, helping confirm periods when the area was completely quiet. The second group reported unusual activity, such as a vehicle idling, a faint horn, unexplained dog barking, or a shadowy figure moving in the backyard. This group was especially important because it could contain small clues for reconstructing movement during the disappearance window. The third group didn't directly observe anything, but provided context about neighborhood routines and what felt off-rhythm compared to normal. All collected data was entered into a master chart, time-stamped where possible, and formed into a list of indirect witnesses ranked by priority for cross-analysis with the scene and Laura's schedule. When the neighborhood canvass concluded without yielding a strong enough lead to narrow the scope, the response team moved to the next step in missing person protocol, launching a nighttime search with the assistance of K9 units. At this point, the sky had gone completely dark and the temperature continued to drop, significantly limiting visibility by the naked eye. The search team chose to begin from the area around the Caldwell residence, which was considered the focal point as it was the last confirmed location where the victim had been present. First, officers brought the K9 units to the back door to pick up the scent from the area where Laura had entered the house, then released the lead so the dogs could begin tracking based on their natural reactions. Each dog was equipped with reflective lights and a GPS tracker, so the support team could follow closely and avoid losing contact in an area with numerous natural obstacles. The K9 units started the first sweep around the backyard, the side paths of the house, and the areas adjacent to the fence, aiming to determine whether any trail led away from the house that matched the lingering scent. However, the scent trail was interrupted very early. It only extended a few dozen meters before ending at the sparse grass bordering the neighboring property. This rapid loss of trail was recorded in the initial K9 report, and the support team immediately shifted to a second, wider radius sweep, expanding the search to natural trails commonly used by local residents for walking. The search team set up high-powered lights along the trails near the Caldwell backyard, focusing on paths leading toward the lightly wooded area where terrain could make nighttime observation difficult. The dogs were given articles from inside the house to re-scent in order to increase reactivity if they encountered traces, but the results still showed no improvement. Every direction the handlers took yielded the same outcome. The scent trail was either broken or too faint, not continuous enough to establish a specific path of travel. In parallel, a manual search team was deployed to visually scan every open patch of ground, every gap between trees, and every area of grass showing signs of compression. They swept flashlights over suspicious areas, checking for footprints, slide marks, or any items that might have been discarded. But throughout the entire nighttime search radius, nothing directly related to Laura was found. The search also included scanning along the fence line, the area bordering the rear access road, and the dark patches between natural features such as piles of dry leaves, low bushes, or soft soil. Despite many spots being thoroughly illuminated and examined, there were no indications of the victim's presence or any notable movement consistent with the established time frame. During the operation, officers continuously marked areas that had already been cleared to avoid redundant checking and to allow for logical expansion the following day. Additionally, the coordination team noted potential areas that could not be effectively accessed at night due to limited lighting. These would be re-examined during daylight for more thorough verification. By the time the entire close radius sweep around the Caldwell house was completed, the nighttime search team's conclusion was clearly recorded in the report. No traces, physical evidence, or direct leads had appeared within the searched area. After the nighttime search concluded without yielding any relevant traces, the search force had no choice but to expand the checked area beyond the immediate vicinity of the Caldwell home, focusing on the edge of the Appalachian forest, an area with more complex terrain but also higher probability if the victim had accidentally left the house or been taken to a location farther from the residential zone. The coordination team mobilized additional personnel to form cluster search groups, with each group responsible for a specific terrain segment that included natural trails, strips of thin forest, clearings between bushes, and the fences behind adjoining properties. The groups carried detailed topographic maps, lighting support, marking stakes, and communication devices to ensure no assigned area was missed. They started from the trails leading into the forest edge and conducted sweeps in a horizontal grid pattern, walking while observing signs of disturbance such as lightly scuffed soil, dry leaves displaced in an unusual direction, recently broken branches, or footprints that did not match the shoe patterns of familiar local residents. Whenever a noteworthy spot was found, for example, an area of ground compressed more deeply than surrounding soil, a stretch of grass flattened in a prolonged direction, or fresh breaks and scattered pine needles on the forest floor, they immediately placed a stake and photographed the location for inclusion in the report. These points could not yet be confirmed as related, but documenting them helped create a detailed map of minor terrain changes for later cross-analysis with other data. During the expansion, several locations were flagged due to clearer signs of disturbance, such as a narrow parting in the grass or a long slide mark on damp soil, suggesting the possibility that a heavy object had been dragged through. Such areas were given priority numbers for daytime re-examination, when evaluation would be more accurate and comprehensive due to better visibility. The search team also noted many locations where terrain prevented safe nighttime access, such as densely vegetated sections or small slopes that could not be safely navigated without adequate light. These were added to the overall resurvey required list. After hours of uninterrupted sweeping along the forest edges, the search force completed a preliminary marked map that included checked areas, swept routes, and locations needing return visits. No direct traces pointed to Laura's presence, but the distribution of disturbance points allowed the coordination team to begin building an expanded search plan for the following day. That plan had to account for more complex, deeper forest terrain, the need for additional personnel, safe access strategies, and priority levels for each area based on initial findings. Planning was carried out concurrently with compiling all information gathered from the forest edge zone, ensuring the transition from near-house to peripheral searching remained orderly and transparent. Immediately after completing the expanded search phase around the forest edge area and finding no direct traces related to Laura Caldwell's disappearance, the investigative team shifted to examining factors that could help form an initial persons of interest list. One of the most prominent details to emerge from Ethan's initial statement was that Laura had ridden with an unfamiliar shuttle driver on her return trip from the airport not long before she went missing. From that detail, the investigative team compiled a list of individuals who had close contact with Laura in the days prior to her disappearance, including Raymond Baylor, the shuttle driver recorded as having driven Laura home on her most recent trip. Scrutiny of Raymond was not based on hasty conclusions or assumptions, but followed proper procedure. Every person who had significant interaction with the victim in the recent time frame had to be evaluated, especially since, according to Ethan, that ride had made Laura feel uneasy. The investigative team contacted the shuttle service company to gather background data on Raymond, including employment history, the routes he drove, his scheduled shifts on the day Laura used the service, and any prior customer complaints about his behavior. Personnel records showed Raymond had been with the company for a few months, resided in a neighborhood not far from Charleston, and had no notable prior violent offenses. However, internal reports indicated he had once received a mild reprimand for making inappropriate comments to a passenger on a previous trip. This was not enough to classify Raymond as dangerous, but it was a data point that needed to be noted in the overall assessment. The team continued by obtaining Raymond's detailed schedule for the week of Laura's disappearance and cross-referencing his work hours with the timeline police had already established. Time records showed he had one driving shift that day, with start and end points that did not directly overlap with the exact time Laura went missing, but since the possibility that he was near the Caldwell residence during the relevant window could not yet be ruled out, police placed Raymond on the list for more thorough vetting. The review expanded to factors such as the condition of the vehicle Raymond drove, including maintenance records, vehicle location data near the time of the incident, and anyone who rode or worked with him during that shift. Officers also gathered statements from coworkers, supervisors, and anyone who had worked closely with Raymond during that period to determine whether his behavior showed anything unusual before or after Laura's disappearance. Some coworkers described Raymond as quiet, but occasionally prone to saying things that made passengers uncomfortable without realizing they were inappropriate. While not sufficient to build any accusations, this trait led investigators to flag Raymond as a factor requiring continued verification. Based on the compiled data regarding background, schedule, and potential contact with the victim, the investigative team officially designated Raymond Baylor as a person of interest, meaning an individual requiring close examination during the initial screening phase. Placing Raymond in this category did not mean he was considered a suspect. Rather, in the absence of specific evidence from the scene, anyone with significant recent contact with Laura had to be evaluated based on access level and logical investigative relevance. Immediately after completing the review of factors related to Raymond Baylor and adding him to the persons of interest list, the investigative team moved to another critical task in assessing the possibility that the victim left voluntarily: a full examination of Laura Caldwell's activities during the week before she disappeared. The goal was to determine whether anything in her personal life, work, or social relationships showed signs that she might have chosen to leave the area, abruptly changed plans, or intended to temporarily remove herself from her familiar environment without telling anyone. First, police contacted Laura's workplace to collect information about her schedule, demeanor, interactions, and any behavioral changes in the most recent days. Coworkers described Laura as stable, reliable, and consistent in maintaining her work routine. No one reported conflicts, unusual pressure, or signs of instability in the period leading up to her disappearance. Her official work schedule matched exactly what Ethan had provided, showing no planned shift changes, sudden leave requests, or schedule adjustments. Next, police gathered information from close friends, nearby neighbors, and several community acquaintances. Each was asked about interactions with Laura during her final week, their perception of her mood and attitude, and any future plans she may have mentioned. No one reported that Laura expressed a desire to leave Charleston, take a break, or showed any psychological shift that might lead to voluntarily leaving home. Close friends confirmed Laura continued participating fully in daily activities and showed no signs of preparing to depart, such as packing belongings, arranging pet care, or mentioning personal difficulties she needed to escape. After cross-referencing all information, the investigative team created a comparison table between Laura's final week activities and common indicators present in voluntary missing person cases. Key factors evaluated included mental state, job satisfaction, personal conflicts, psychological crises, financial situation, and family or social pressures. None of these factors were present in Laura's case. Additionally, police reviewed basic financial data, credit card transactions, cash withdrawals, and banking activity in the days before her disappearance. All transactions were normal, with no unusual cash withdrawals or financial signs suggesting preparation to leave her current life. Laura's landline and mail records also showed no spikes in activity. No suspicious calls or correspondence appeared in the relevant time frame. Combining all collected information, the investigative team found no evidence supporting the possibility that Laura left voluntarily. There was no preparatory behavior, no personal motive, no change in daily habits, and no psychological pressure that could explain a voluntary disappearance. While continuing to sweep the Appalachian Forest Edge areas and cross-checking the map of previously marked locations from earlier search phases, one search team assigned to survey along a small side trail not far from the Caldwell house discovered a detail with potential direct relevance to Laura Caldwell's disappearance. As they moved along the narrow dirt path still covered with dry leaves, one team member noticed an object lying off to the right edge of the trail, only a few steps from the main path. Upon approaching and conducting a preliminary visual check, they identified the object as a woman's shoe that matched the description of the footwear Laura regularly wore in daily activities. Because this area had been prioritized and marked in a previous phase, discovering the shoe became critical evidence that had to be documented according to standard procedure. Right at the discovery site, the search team recorded the shoe's relative coordinates by marking the location on the topographic map and simultaneously took photographs from multiple angles, including close-up shots of the shoe, mid-distance photos showing its position relative to the trail, and wide shots capturing the surrounding context, ground surface, dry leaf layer, and nearby vegetation. This documentation ensured that during later analysis, investigators could accurately recreate the discovery position and assess whether the shoe likely fell naturally, was placed at the scene, or was dragged or slid down from a higher point during movement. At this stage, the search team followed correct procedure by not moving the evidence until the evidence collection unit arrived. When the evidence team reached the site, they performed an initial inspection of the shoe's condition without altering its position. They then used specialized tools to lift the shoe in a way that minimized contact and placed it into a separate evidence bag with proper labeling. The entire process was conducted with fresh gloves to avoid DNA cross-contamination or unnecessary touch evidence. An evidence tag was completed on-site, including the case number, evidence identifier, brief description of the shoe's characteristics, collecting team names, relative geographic location, and exact collection time. The shoe was then coded according to the evidence room standard, typically starting with a missing person case prefix plus sequential number, for example, LCC01, indicating the first piece of evidence in Laura Caldwell's file. This coding ensured the item could be tracked throughout the investigation, without risk of mix-up with any other evidence. After the item was collected and coded, investigators continued sweeping the surrounding radius to ensure no additional related objects were missed. But nothing further was found at that moment. All information regarding the shoe discovery was entered into the case file under the category Evidence Discovered at Scene. Trail #1 marking it as the first piece of evidence with potential direct connection to Laura since she was last seen. Immediately after the shoe was collected and logged into the evidence record, the investigation team moved on to examining the vehicles involved to determine whether any trace evidence from Laura's disappearance appeared on the vehicles owned by the Caldwell family. The two vehicles requiring inspection were Ethan Caldwell's car and Laura Caldwell's car. The examination was conducted in strict accordance with standard procedure, in which officers must first perform an overall visual observation before proceeding to detailed inspections of each specific area of the vehicle. First, the team approached Ethan's vehicle, which was parked in the garage of the residence. They documented the parking position, the exterior condition, and the body surfaces to check for any scrape marks, adhered dirt, dry leaves, or any other disturbances on the windows or door handles. They then opened the doors and began observing the interior, examining the floor mats, front seats, rear seats, and the side storage compartments. They looked for any foreign objects, debris, dirt, or noticeable fibers, but everything was in a normal state with no indications that anyone other than the regular user had been inside the vehicle. The team then opened the trunk and inspected the stored items such as work tools, bags, containers, or Ethan's personal belongings, but none were determined to be related to Laura's disappearance. They also examined the undercarriage using flashlights, searching for soil, roots, or unusual skid marks, but the undercarriage was clean and consistent with regular use on paved roads. After finding no suspicious signs on Ethan's vehicle, the team moved to Laura's vehicle. This car was parked in the front yard and showed no signs of use near the time of her disappearance, according to the information provided by Ethan. The team observed the exterior body, noting an even layer of dust, with no evidence of movement around the time of the incident. Upon opening the doors, they examined the interior using the same procedure as with Ethan's car, including the floor, seats, dashboard, and storage compartments. Inside the vehicle were only typical personal items such as an empty purse, a few small objects, and vehicle documents. There were no signs that the car had been used in an unusual situation or that anyone had entered it after Laura returned home on the day she disappeared. Inspection of the trunk yielded similar results: no foreign objects, no signs of recent disturbance, and no items suggesting movement or concealment of objects. The undercarriage was checked for soil or mud that did not match the weather conditions and terrain around the Caldwell residence, but it was dry and showed no evidence of travel over soft ground or light woods in the time frame close to her disappearance. After completing the inspection of both vehicles and documenting all details in the report, the team concluded that there was no physical evidence on either Ethan's or Laura's vehicle, indicating that these cars were directly involved in her disappearance during the initial investigation phase. The conclusion no related evidence found was added to the case file as documentation that the Caldwell family's personal vehicles at the time of the first inspection provided no noteworthy information that could determine Laura's whereabouts or identify unusual activity near the time of her disappearance. After completing the first vehicle inspection and obtaining no evidence directly related to Laura Caldwell's disappearance, the investigation team proceeded to the synthesis step to identify viable investigative directions based on all data collected during the initial phase. This process followed the standard protocol for missing person cases of unclear cause, which includes classifying the main possible scenarios: accidental incident, the victim voluntarily leaving home, or intentional criminal act. First, the team considered the possibility of an accident. They re-examined the area around the house, the path to the forest edge, and nearby trails to assess whether Laura could have accidentally fallen, slipped, or suffered an injury preventing her return. However, the fact that Laura had safely returned home that afternoon, combined with Ethan finding no signs of her movement in the yard immediately afterward, made the accident scenario difficult to reconcile with the facts. Additionally, the nighttime search and expanded search at the forest edge uncovered no locations indicating a fall or incident in the immediate vicinity. The accident scenario was noted but not placed in the high probability category. The second investigative direction was the possibility that Laura voluntarily left home. The team cross-referenced all previously collected data regarding Laura's activities during her final week, including information from coworkers, acquaintances, close contacts, and her personal financial records. There were no indications that Laura intended to leave her normal life, no notable psychological pressure, no behavioral changes, or material preparations for departure. There were no unusual financial transactions or signs of preparing for a trip or abandoning her familiar environment. This made the voluntary departure scenario unreasonable when compared to both physical evidence and statements from those around her. Therefore, this direction was recorded but not prioritized. The third investigative direction was the possibility that Laura became the victim of criminal activity. This direction was evaluated as logically more probable because the initial search yielded no trace of the victim's movement after returning home. Combined with Ethan's information that Laura had recently had a negative experience with a shuttle driver. Although there was no direct evidence yet, the absence of accident traces or signs of voluntary departure created a gap in the timeline that gave the criminal scenario more basis. Furthermore, Laura's shoe found on the trail in a location inconsistent with her usual movement patterns suggested the evidence item may have appeared due to third-party intervention. After evaluating all data across the three scenario groups, the investigation team concluded that the criminal direction must be prioritized in the next phase. This decision was not based on assumption, but was formed by eliminating the other two scenarios based on actual evidence and the absence of supporting signs for non-criminal possibilities. The shift in focus to the criminal direction was recorded in the file as the official guiding step for the subsequent investigation process, marking the transition from a standard missing person search model to evaluating the possibility of intentional conduct by another individual, leading to Laura Caldwell's disappearance. Immediately after the investigation team shifted focus to the criminal direction, the next step was to fully cross-check Ethan Caldwell's initial statements against the crime scene findings collected in previous sections to determine whether any inconsistencies existed between the information he provided and the actual condition at the Caldwell residence when police arrived. The comparison was conducted across three main data groups: the condition of the back door, the time Ethan returned home, and his description of Laura's activities before she disappeared. First, the team examined the condition of the back door, a critical location because it was where Laura was confirmed to have entered before disappearing and was also thoroughly surveyed during the crime scene documentation. Ethan stated that when he returned, the back door may not have been locked, suggesting Laura might have stepped outside or someone could have entered. However, the crime scene record showed the back door fully closed with no signs of forced handling or hasty opening. Although this was not sufficient to prove intentional inconsistency by Ethan, the discrepancy between his statement and the actual condition was noted as a point requiring attention, especially since the back door was the only area directly related to Laura's movement that afternoon. The second comparison point concerned the time Ethan returned home. According to his initial statement, he returned at a fairly specific time in the evening. However, when cross-checked against the time frame neighbors recorded for activity in the area, several residents described seeing lights at the Caldwell house turn on later than the time Ethan claimed he had entered the home. Although this was only indirect information and not every neighbor was certain of the exact observation time, the investigation team still recorded it because it created an inconsistency between the statement and surrounding environmental data. Additionally, the vehicle examinations of both Ethan's and Laura's cars revealed no evidence that Ethan returned early or made unusual trips. But the team still had to question the accuracy of the timeline Ethan provided due to the slight discrepancy between indirect statements and his description. The third comparison point related to how Ethan described Laura's activities before she disappeared. He said Laura typically stayed indoors if she had no evening plans, and according to him, she might have been changing clothes or doing light cleaning when he left in the morning. However, when police surveyed the house, there were no clear signs that Laura had been engaged in any specific activity at the time she disappeared. The bedroom was tidy, the kitchen showed no signs of unfinished tasks, and the living room had no items indicating recent interaction by Laura. This did not directly contradict Ethan's statement, but it created an information gap. If Laura returned home and stayed inside for only a short period before disappearing, there should have been traces of daily activity or minor actions in the space. The absence of such signs led the investigation team to note this as another point for consideration. The investigation team compiled the three groups of inconsistencies: the backdoor condition, Ethan's return time, and the description of activities before disappearance, into a report titled Statement versus Crime Scene Comparison. Phase 1, marking that Ethan's initial statements did not fully align with the actual recorded findings. Although not yet sufficient to draw any conclusions, these discrepancies were regarded as details potentially critical in determining the next investigative direction. After completing the comparison of Ethan Caldwell's statements with crime scene records and data collected in the early days of the investigation, the team reached a key evaluation point. No physical evidence existed that was strong enough to create a breakthrough. The shoe found on the trail provided no clear physical traces to determine Laura's direction of movement or confirm the presence of another individual in the area. The examinations of Ethan's and Laura's vehicles also yielded nothing noteworthy. All crime scene surveys, from the yard to the Appalachian forest edge, found no direct clues. Concurrently, reviewing Laura's final week of activity revealed no preparations for voluntary departure, and the minor inconsistencies in Ethan's statements, although recorded, were still insufficient to become verifiable evidence for any criminal hypothesis. In addition to the lack of physical evidence, the failure to locate a body left the investigation in a state of severe data deficiency. No body meant no ability to determine the cause of disappearance, analyze injury traces, or extract DNA or tissue to reconstruct events. Examinations of areas around the house, trails, forest edge, and locations marked during the initial search phase all led to no discoveries related to Laura, leaving the entire investigative process without a physical foundation to proceed. Information from the neighborhood canvas, though fully recorded, still failed to produce a consistent activity pattern for the team to rely on. The prolonged deadlock made each subsequent investigative step limited in verification capability due to the absence of new data for comparison or deductive reasoning. Evaluations of the investigative directions, accident, voluntary departure, criminal act, remained at a theoretical level without additional evidence to strengthen any scenario. The team continued to review Ethan's statements, but could not advance further without new physical evidence or witnesses. After synthesizing all data over an extended period without progress, the sheriff's office reached an administrative decision in full accordance with procedure. The case file no longer met the requirements to continue active investigation without new data. This did not mean closing the case, but rather suspending investigation due to evidentiary limitations. Laura Caldwell's missing person file was reclassified and transferred to the cold case category, where unsolved cases remain capable of being reopened if new evidence, statements, or investigative conditions arise. The transfer to cold case status was recorded in the county system as the official pause of the initial investigation phase. Immediately after Laura Caldwell's disappearance file was classified as a cold case, the final processing procedure of the initial investigation phase was implemented, sealing all physical evidence and archiving the complete case file according to the standards of the Kanawha County Sheriff's Department. The purpose of this step was to ensure that all data collected during the initial phase, even if it had not yet yielded conclusive value, was preserved in its original condition for future re-examination when new technology or information becomes available. First, the Evidence Management Unit re-examined the list of collected items, including the shoe found on the trail, soil samples taken from the Caldwell yard and forest edge area, and all Polaroid photographs documenting the crime scene condition in the early days of the case. Each piece of evidence was given a final check to confirm its physical condition remained unchanged from the initial logging. The shoe, cataloged as evidence item CE01, was placed into a specialized evidence bag with moisture-resistant and deformation-resistant properties before being sealed with a legal evidence seal containing full details including case number, evidence code, collection date and time, and the signature of the responsible officer. Similarly, soil samples were divided into individual containers, organized in standard storage boxes to prevent cross-contamination, sealed with moisture-proof caps, and then sealed according to protocol with clear labeling of each sample's collection location for future comparison. Although these soil samples had not provided significant leads in the initial phase, they were preserved because they might prove useful for advanced analyses not yet possible at the current time. The Polaroid photographs received extra careful handling due to the light and moisture-sensitive nature of the material. Each photo was inspected for surface condition to ensure no new scratches or abnormal fading, then placed into specialized protective sleeves with light-filtering film. The originals were prioritized for storage in a climate-controlled vault to extend material longevity. Additionally, digital copies of the Polaroid images were created to facilitate future reference without direct handling of the originals. Once all physical evidence was properly sealed, the file processing unit proceeded to close the complete set of case-related documents. The file included statements from Ethan Caldwell and indirect witnesses, crime scene survey reports, K-9 reports, expanded search reports, neighborhood canvas data, first vehicle inspection results, the synthesis report of the 3 investigative directions, and notes regarding minor inconsistencies in the initial statements. Each document was arranged chronologically and indexed for ease of future retrieval. Thereafter, the entire paper file and physical evidence were transferred to the county's cold case storage facility, which maintains temperature, humidity, and security controls to standard. Upon entry into storage, the file was registered in the electronic management system with its own unique cold case identifier to track any future access. This procedure concluded the entire initial investigation phase, marking that the Laura Caldwell file had officially entered long-term archival status until new data sufficient to warrant reopening the case appears. In 2014, facing mounting pressure from the backlog of cases that had lingered unsolved for years in the Central Appalachia region, the state of West Virginia launched a large-scale reform program in the investigation of unresolved cases, leading to the establishment of the West Virginia Cold Case Unit, a dedicated unit tasked with re-evaluating all backlogged files, prioritizing them, and applying modern forensic technology to seek breakthroughs that the original investigations had been unable to achieve. When the unit became operational, cold case files from counties across the state were gathered and transferred for review, including the Laura Caldwell case, which had been shelved since 1998 due to insufficient conclusive evidence and the absence of a body. The review process was conducted in batches based on criteria such as the date of the incident, the completeness of the original documentation, the type of physical evidence collected, the potential for applying new forensic techniques, and the existence of inconsistencies in prior investigation reports. When Laura Caldwell's file came up for review, the unit's review board quickly recognized it as one of the most clearly anomalous missing person cases. The victim had been confirmed to have returned home, but vanished within a very short window of time, leaving no signs of disturbance in daily life, no evidence she left voluntarily, and no scene evidence sufficient to support theories of accident or voluntary departure. Additionally, the single shoe found on the trail, scattered soil samples, and the original Polaroid photos documenting the initial scene, typical evidence from 1990s missing person cases, were all items that could now be reanalyzed using technology unavailable in 1998. This placed the Laura Caldwell case squarely within the potential for event reconstruction criteria the cold case unit was targeting. Recognizing these factors, the review board classified the Caldwell file as high priority, placing it in the eligible for reopening category based on the viability of applying modern analytical methods to intact physical evidence. A formal decision to reopen the case was then drafted as an internal memorandum signed by the cold case unit commander and sent to the Archives Division to initiate release of the file. Upon receiving the order, the archives staff retrieved all related physical evidence, including the shoe designated CE01, the sealed soil samples, and the original set of Polaroid photographs. All seals were inspected to confirm no tampering had occurred during the 16 years in storage. The evidence was then transferred to the new investigation team's secure temporary storage area, accessible only to specially authorized personnel. At the same time, the complete paper case file, containing all original scene reports, neighborhood canvas notes, initial witness statements, and early search records, was handed over to the assigned investigative team. This team consisted of detectives experienced in re-examining old crime scenes, cross-referencing statements recorded years earlier, and reconstructing timelines. Their mandate was to review the entire file from a contemporary perspective, identify details overlooked or underexplored in the initial phase, and plan re-evaluation of the evidence under 2014 forensic standards. The formal assignment of the investigative team marked a significant milestone. After 16 years of inactivity, the Laura Caldwell case was officially reactivated for continued review using more advanced technology and methods, with the goal of determining whether anything in the old data might open new avenues of inquiry. Once the investigative team took custody of all original evidence and files from the cold case archives, their first task was to digitize and reanalyze the Polaroid photographs taken of the Caldwell home on the day police first arrived in 1998. These were the only remaining visual records from the initial investigation, as digital photography did not yet exist at the time, making the Polaroids the sole unaltered documentation of the scene's condition before any search or processing activity occurred. The team brought the entire set of Polaroids into a dedicated image analysis lab, where high-resolution scanners and enhancement software were used to convert the physical photos into digital files while revealing details no longer visible to the naked eye due to age-related degradation. Each photograph was scanned multiple times under different lighting settings to reduce noise, increase contrast in dark areas, and sharpen small details such as door edges, wall corners, or the exact placement of household items. After digitization was complete, the team moved to frame-by-frame analysis. They cross-referenced each Polaroid with the 1998 First Response Team scene diagram to establish shooting sequence, camera angle, and specific context. While examining photos of the rear door area, the door Laura was known to have entered that afternoon before disappearing, the analysts noticed a striking detail never mentioned in the original investigation. The rear doorknob was in a fully closed position, showing no indication of having been turned or lifted, as if the door had been opened shortly before the photos were taken. To rule out blur or lighting artifacts, the technicians applied sharpening algorithms and color layer separation to clarify the metal structure of the knob. The results confirmed the knob was fixed in the closed position, consistent with the door being fully shut and showing no recent movement. This became significant when compared to Ethan Caldwell's original 1998 statement, in which he said he was not sure if the back door was locked and implied Laura might have opened it or someone could have approached from the rear before he got home. Yet the Polaroid evidence showed the door had not been opened, or at least not since police arrived on scene. This created a direct contradiction between Ethan's statement and the most pristine visual evidence the file still possessed. The team further magnified the door edge area for any signs of drag marks, scratches, or minor deformation, indicating the door had been pulled or opened, but every enhancement technique yielded the same result. The door was fully closed, the knob surface showed no fresh marks, and nothing matched Ethan's description. When the team compiled the image analysis findings, they flagged this contradiction as the most notable anomaly in the entire visual dataset from the scene. It was not conclusive on its own, but it was a discrepancy capable of shifting the assessment of events preceding Laura's disappearance. Because the Polaroids were taken immediately upon police arrival, they accurately reflected the door's condition at the earliest possible documented moment, making the fully closed position impossible to dismiss in the re-evaluation. All results were documented in the report titled Polaroid Digitization, Phase 1, which confirmed that the rear door and doorknob images were inconsistent with the initial reporting party's statement, marking the first time in 16 years that modern tools had revealed an observable conflict between physical evidence and the account of the person who reported Laura missing. Following the Polaroid analysis and the identification of the rear door discrepancy, the investigative team shifted to fully reconstructing the timeline of the day Laura Caldwell disappeared, aiming to more precisely pinpoint possible event windows and narrow the unexplained period of her disappearance. The first step was to re-examine natural lighting conditions in the Charleston, West Virginia area in late autumn 1998. The team retrieved historical weather data, sunset times, post-sunset residual light levels, and average visibility ranges from late afternoon through late evening. The data showed that by the time Laura was last seen, natural light was dropping rapidly, creating conditions in which movement near the property would be difficult to notice from a distance. This established that any activity after that point, whether Laura leaving on her own or someone approaching, was likely unseen by neighbors or passers-by. With lighting data complete, the team analyzed Ethan Caldwell's movements on the day of the incident to identify periods when he lacked an alibi. His original statement provided departure and return times, but no independent data confirmed exact routes or stops. To test the accuracy of those times, the team checked records from Ethan's workplace, cross-referenced typical commute times under 1998 traffic conditions, and calculated possible early or late deviations. The analysis revealed a window of time during which Ethan had no verifiable independent alibi. This gap was derived from minor discrepancies between his stated departure from work, expected travel time on his usual route, and the first neighbor observation of house lights turning on. Although these findings did not constitute direct evidence, they allowed the team to isolate an evening period during which Ethan had no third-party confirmation of his whereabouts. The team then merged this unaccounted-for window with Laura's original timeline. Records showed she returned home in the afternoon and disappeared before Ethan noticed her absence. Combining this with the 1998 lighting data produced a significantly narrower time frame for when the incident could have occurred, beginning when natural light dropped to levels that obscured distant observation, and ending when Ethan reported discovering his wife missing. The full timeline was rebuilt, using a layered data approach. Layer 1. Definitively verifiable markers, Laura's last sighting, Ethan's 911 call. Layer 2. Moderately reliable markers, neighbors seeing house lights come on. Layer 3. Markers inferred from Laura's routine behavior and lighting data. When the three layers were combined, the team produced a feasible window for Laura's disappearance that was substantially shorter than the one established in 1998. The results were compiled into the report. Reconstructed timeline, Phase 1, which detailed indisputable timestamps, points requiring further verification, and, most importantly, the period during which Ethan lacked an independent alibi. This report marked the completion of the timeline reconstruction based on historical lighting data and the known movements of both the victim and the reporting party, laying the groundwork for the next phase of the reopened investigation. After completing the timeline reconstruction and identifying the period during which Ethan Caldwell had no alibi, the investigation team moved on to re-examining physical evidence related to the vehicle, specifically the car owned by Ethan, with the goal of utilizing modern forensic analysis technology that was not available during the 1998 investigation phase. This re-examination focused on two groups of samples: soil adhering to the vehicle's undercarriage and microscopic fibers that may have remained in the vehicle's interior, including the floor mats, seats, and small crevices difficult to detect with the naked eye. The first step was to bring Ethan's car into the technical examination area, where it was lifted using hydraulic equipment to facilitate the collection of soil samples from underneath. The technical team used specialized tools to gently scrape soil from key locations, such as the chassis, fenders, cross members, and other underside areas that typically retain dirt when a vehicle travels over uneven terrain. These soil samples were divided into individual sealed containers, labeled according to the exact location of collection, and immediately sealed on site to prevent contamination. After completing the soil collection, the forensic team shifted to examining the interior. They used alternate light sources, ALS, and microscopic adhesive traps to collect tiny, nearly invisible fibers lodged in seat crevices, carpet edges, door sills, and under the dashboard. Fibers too small to identify with the naked eye were placed on glass slides and transferred to the modern DNA analysis lab. This technique, which has only become viable in recent years, allows DNA extraction from extremely small trace samples, something impossible in 1998. During analysis, the forensic team compared DNA obtained from the fibers with Laura Caldwell's DNA profile preserved from the original missing person case file. After multiple rounds of testing to ensure accuracy, results revealed that at least one microscopic fiber recovered from the vehicle's interior matched Laura's DNA. Since Laura's own car was not used on the day she disappeared, and according to Ethan, she had not been inside his vehicle in the recent period, the presence of her fibers in Ethan's car, particularly in low contact areas such as the rear seat crevices, represented an anomaly that the investigation team flagged for further clarification. Concurrently with the fiber analysis, the forensic team continued evaluating the soil samples taken from the undercarriage. These samples were compared against soil baseline data from multiple locations throughout the county, including the Caldwell residence grounds, main roads, secondary roads, and certain soft soil areas in the Appalachian Forest region. When mineral composition and particle structure were compared, several undercarriage samples matched the soil type commonly found in the vicinity of old hunting cabins in the Kanawha area, a soil characterized by a distinctive clay and humus content not present in the residential neighborhood where the Caldwells lived. The examiners noted this result because, according to information gathered during the original 1998 investigation, there was no documented reason for Ethan's vehicle to have picked up soil from the hunting cabin area at the time of Laura's disappearance. In his initial statements, Ethan never mentioned driving into deep forest areas or accessing any roads leading to abandoned cabins prior to reporting her missing. Therefore, the presence of soil from the cabin area on his undercarriage became physical evidence inconsistent with the information Ethan provided. When the investigation team compiled all results from this second vehicle examination, they highlighted 3 key data points. Ethan's vehicle contained soil not found near the Caldwell residence, microscopic fibers in the interior matched Laura's DNA. And these findings conflicted with Ethan's statement that Laura had not used his vehicle on the day she disappeared. These data points were not treated as conclusive, but were recorded as significant discoveries because they provided new physical evidence that the 1998 investigation had been unable to detect. All results were incorporated into the report titled Vehicle Forensic Analysis, Phase 2, marking one of the most important advances since the Laura Caldwell case was reactivated. After the second vehicle examination confirmed the presence of soil matching the Kanawha hunting cabin area and microscopic fibers bearing Laura Caldwell's DNA were found in Ethan's car interior, the investigation team focused on the next task, establishing plausible routes Ethan's vehicle could have taken during the unaccounted-for window identified in the timeline reconstruction. The objective was to construct a realistic route map from the Caldwell residence to the hunting cabin area and determine whether travel along that route fit within the time periods for which Ethan lacked an alibi. First, the team used 1998 topographic maps of Kanawha County combined with secondary road and trail data to identify routes leading to the old hunting cabin locations. This area contains numerous abandoned cabins scattered along the edge of the Appalachian forest, characterized by narrow, unmaintained dirt roads accessible only by personal vehicle. From the topographic data, the team identified the 3 most plausible routes from the Caldwell home to the nearest cluster of cabins. Route 1 followed a main secondary road, turned onto a side path, then continued onto a dirt track into the forest. Route 2 looped through the southern area, using less traveled roads with higher elevation. Route 3 was a longer, wide detour, least likely but included to ensure completeness. To assess feasibility, the team measured the length of each segment and estimated travel time based on typical vehicle speeds under late fall traffic conditions when roads might be slightly damp from evening dew. They then compared these travel times against Ethan's unaccounted-for window, the period he could not prove his whereabouts or for which no independent witness existed. When the data were combined, Route 1 emerged as the most probable because the total travel time from the Caldwell home to the nearest cabin area fell squarely within the unaccounted-for timeline window. The team simulated the journey using route reconstruction software, inputting known time markers, average travel speeds, and late fall 1998 dusk lighting conditions. The simulation showed that if Ethan left home during that window, he could easily reach the cabin area via Route 1, stop briefly, and return home before placing the 911 call. To ensure the simulation accurately reflected 1998 realities, the team cross-referenced historical traffic data and road condition reports from that period to eliminate errors. Route 2 required significantly more time, making it incompatible with the timeline window. Route 3 was considerably longer and more difficult, rendering it infeasible under the time constraints. From the aggregated data, the team created the plausible travel route diagram, which included a map marking Route 1, critical turn points, locations where the matching soil type appeared, and the time required for the full round trip. This diagram was formalized as an official document and attached to the case file under its own designation code. By incorporating historical lighting data, average travel speeds, and terrain characteristics, the team determined that Ethan's vehicle being present in the cabin area was entirely consistent with the time markers that remained unverified in his original statements. The route mapping results aligned with the soil findings, establishing a solid physical and temporal foundation for the team to proceed with the next investigative steps. After the plausible route map was completed and the soil samples from Ethan Caldwell's undercarriage were confirmed to match the characteristic soil of the Kanawha hunting cabin area, the investigation team proceeded to search the cabin formerly owned by Ethan to determine whether the location played any role during the unaccounted-for timeline window. The cabin in question was a small wooden structure located deep in a lightly forested area. Ethan had owned it for many years prior to the disappearance and used it primarily for weekend getaways and seasonal hunting. Although it was no longer in regular use by 1998, Ethan's ownership was verified through county property records. Upon approaching the cabin, the team documented the entire surrounding area to ensure the scene remained undisturbed before beginning the search. The cabin was surrounded by the soft, characteristic soil of the region, mixed with layers of decaying leaves and dry branches, features that made it consistent with the soil found on Ethan's undercarriage. The forensic team began by surveying the exterior, focusing on areas showing unusually deep soil compression, often an indicator of heavy objects being placed or multiple people moving. Several such locations were noted along the side of the cabin and near the entrance, where the ground was slightly depressed compared to surrounding areas. Technicians measured compression depth, photographed comprehensively, and marked each spot with stakes for later analysis. After completing the exterior survey, the team entered the cabin. Despite its age, the wooden structure remained intact, with simple interior furnishings, a wooden table, 2 old chairs, a folding bed, and a small cabinet. While reorganizing the space to look for suspicious signs, an examiner discovered a small piece of fabric caught on a splintered section of the folding bed frame. The fabric fragment was too small for immediate visual identification, but was collected as trace evidence due to its characteristics and location, suggesting it may have snagged from someone's clothing near the time of the incident. In addition, the team found a metal button under the old rug inside the cabin. The button did not match any items belonging to the cabin and appeared to have fallen during a struggle or rapid movement. It was coded as evidence and sealed for further analysis. Continuing the search, examiners checked wooden surfaces and table edges for scratches or marks that might indicate recent use around the time of the disappearance. Several scratches fresher than the surrounding wood were noted, though their cause could not yet be determined. When all collected data, exterior soil compression, the microscopic fabric fragment, the non-matching button, and fresh scratches were combined, the team concluded that the cabin exhibited multiple anomalies inconsistent with an abandoned structure. Furthermore, its precise location within the soil matching zone strengthened the hypothesis that the cabin may have served as a stop or scene of events during Ethan's unexplained time window. Based on these findings, the cabin was designated a primary location of interest in the reopened investigation and marked as a secondary crime scene of high analytical value, requiring cross-referencing with all previously collected evidence to assess its true role in Laura Caldwell's disappearance. After the hunting cabin was identified as a primary location of interest and its anomalies were documented, the investigation team moved to the next task, re-interviewing individuals who had close relationships with the Caldwell family at the time of the 1998 disappearance. Among those reviewed, Emily Weaver, who had worked part-time at a local store and was acquainted with the Caldwell family, was flagged for re-contact because old case notes indicated she had appeared in Ethan's social interactions prior to Laura's disappearance. When the team met Emily in 2014, she agreed to cooperate fully after being informed the case had been reopened. From the very first minutes of the interview, Emily confirmed that she had been in a brief romantic relationship with Ethan Caldwell shortly before Laura vanished. Although the 1998 file contained no record of this, Emily explained that the relationship was kept secret, never made public, and existed parallel to Ethan's marriage. According to Emily, the affair was not long-term, but serious enough for Ethan to confide in her about numerous family issues. The team considered this critical information because it directly related to the possible existence of personal motive in the context of the disappearance. When asked about Ethan's and Laura's marriage, Emily stated that Ethan frequently expressed frustration, saying their family life was far less stable than it appeared, and that he felt uncomfortable with changes after Laura took on more responsibilities. Emily recalled Ethan suggesting several times that his life would be easier without the current pressures and although he never directly mentioned separation or divorce, his manner made her believe he felt trapped. When pressed for specifics, Emily said Ethan had spoken about completely changing everything or resolving the problem once and for all. These statements were not frequent but memorable because they occurred when Ethan was visibly stressed. The team noted that these remarks were insufficient to establish motive on their own, but clearly relevant to how Ethan viewed his marriage immediately before the disappearance. Beyond the statements, Emily also described Ethan's behavior in the weeks leading up to Laura's disappearance. He displayed anxiety, would disappear for hours without explanation, and complained of feeling stuck. During that period, Ethan reduced contact with her for a few days at a time, then resumed communication or met her while appearing inexplicably agitated, as if managing something difficult to share. Regarding the days immediately before Laura vanished, Emily remembered Ethan saying, "Everything will change soon." At the time, she did not grasp the full meaning, but after the disappearance, she believed those earlier words carried deeper implication. When the case broke, Emily said Ethan cut off contact for a while, then reappeared and acted as if nothing unusual had ever happened between them. The team recorded this behavioral shift because changes in conduct following a disappearance are often examined when evaluating the actions of someone close to the victim. In addition to personal matters, Emily revealed that Ethan had mentioned the hunting cabin, the same location the team had just searched, during a conversation before Laura disappeared. He described it as the only place he could think clearly, and sometimes used it to escape family pressure. Although this did not necessarily indicate criminal behavior, the team flagged it as significant because it linked the cabin location to Ethan's state of mind in the period leading up to the incident. When the entire statement was compiled, the team recorded that Emily had confirmed the existence of a romantic relationship with Ethan, acknowledged that his pre-disappearance words and actions could reflect dissatisfaction and a desire for radical change, and provided new information connecting Ethan to the hunting cabin. All of this was incorporated into the report titled Statement Review. Emily Weaver, as a key component in re-evaluating relationships and potential motives in the disappearance of Laura Caldwell. After completing the recording of Emily Weaver's statement and consolidating the data related to her personal relationship with Ethan Caldwell, the investigation team moved to the stage of analyzing staging indicators in the 1998 disappearance to determine whether the details initially considered random were in fact deliberate signs created by someone to mislead the investigation. The staging analysis began with the first piece of evidence ever discovered during the original investigation phase, Laura Caldwell's shoe found on the trail near the forest. In 1998, the exact position and condition of the shoe could not be clearly determined, but upon re-examining the case file, the team noted that the shoe had been found in a location with no drag marks, no footprints leading to or away from it, and no terrain data indicating that Laura had moved through that area. When compared to trail maps, the team found that the shoe's location deviated from natural travel routes and did not match any of Laura's known walking habits, according to information collected from friends and family. During the reanalysis, the investigation team created a simulation model showing that if the shoe had fallen naturally while Laura was moving, there would have been compression or disturbance of the dry leaves around it. However, the Polaroid crime scene photos showed the ground surface bore no such signs. This raised the possibility that the shoe did not fall, but was placed there from a different direction of travel, in a manner intended to create a false trail, suggesting Laura might have walked along the trail. When this data was cross-referenced with the soil sample from under Ethan's vehicle that matched the hunting cabin area, the team concluded that the shoe may have been brought from elsewhere to the trail and placed there deliberately to divert the investigation away from the cabin area. The next step in the staging analysis focused on the detail that had initially derailed the original investigation: information about Raymond Baylor, the shuttle driver who transported Laura before she disappeared. In the 1998 files, Raymond was viewed as exhibiting unusual behavior, but during the cold case review, the team re-examined every piece of data related to him and found no physical evidence, placing Raymond near the Caldwell residence on the day Laura vanished. Furthermore, no evidence at the cabin or in the search area matched Raymond's traces. Modern forensic findings revealed no DNA, fibers, or mud from shoes linked to Raymond. This led the team to assess that Raymond's initial suspect status most likely stemmed from two factors: the tense incident during the shuttle ride Laura experienced, and the way Ethan mentioned this incident to police in a manner that naturally positioned Raymond as the primary suspect. When Ethan's statements were compared with the new data, the team noted multiple signs that Ethan actively steered the investigation toward Raymond on the day he reported her missing. Ethan was the first to suggest Raymond might be the person who harmed her. He emphasized the unusual nature of the shuttle ride. Despite there being no evidence, Raymond was near the Caldwell home at the relevant time. Additionally, when reanalyzing Ethan's statements using modern micro-context evaluation technology, the team observed that Ethan described Raymond's behavior with a level of detail disproportionate to the actual time he had contact with him, suggesting the story may have been pre-prepared as a script to place Raymond in the position of the convenient suspect. This became particularly significant when viewed alongside two other factors: the placed shoe and the match between the soil under Ethan's vehicle and the hunting cabin area. If the shoe was placed to create a false direction of travel, then introducing Raymond as the initial suspect further strengthened the likelihood that someone deliberately constructed a misleading investigative path from the outset, so police would not focus on the person closest to the victim. After comparing all data from physical evidence, statements, Polaroid analysis results, soil samples, to information from Emily Weaver, the investigation team conducted a comprehensive evaluation of the degree of fit between each potential suspect and the forensic data. When the evaluation model was applied, Raymond Baylor was quickly eliminated from the suspect list due to the absence of any physical data linking him to the scene or the hunting cabin, as well as no contradictions in his timeline. In contrast, when the same model was applied to Ethan Caldwell, the team recorded connections between the soil under the vehicle, the hunting cabin, Laura's microscopic fabric fibers, Emily's statement, and the contradiction regarding the rear door state in the Polaroid photos. At the same time, timeline data showed Ethan had a period without a suitable alibi consistent with travel to the cabin. The team concluded in the report staging analysis, Phase 1, that the staging indicators, including the placed shoe and the fabrication of Raymond Baylor as a false suspect, combined with modern forensic data, all converged in one direction: Ethan Caldwell was the primary suspect in Laura Caldwell's disappearance. After concluding that the staging indicators most likely originated from the same source and that Ethan Caldwell was the primary suspect, the investigation team proceeded to fully reconstruct the night Laura Caldwell disappeared using new forensic data, digitized Polaroid photos, reanalyzed physical evidence, and established route simulations. The goal of this step was not to make an absolute assertion, but to construct the most plausible scenario based on overlapping data points to assess how the sequence of events could have unfolded in the context of the Caldwell home, the surrounding forest, and the hunting cabin. The reconstruction began by simulating the most likely path inside the Caldwell home in the late afternoon of 1998. The last time Laura was seen, the team used the home layout documented in the Polaroid photos, combined with a 1998 crime scene diagram, to identify probable movement areas. According to historical lighting data, this was the time when natural light diminished rapidly, making the rear door area, the entrance Laura used, an ideal blind spot if someone was waiting or watching from inside. The simulation showed that as soon as Laura entered through the rear door, possibly off guard, a brief struggle could have occurred in the kitchen or nearby entry area. This aligned with the detail that the house showed no obvious signs of disturbance because analytical models indicated a quick restraint struggle that produced minimal noise and could have occurred in just a few dozen seconds. When combined with the fact that the rear door handle in the Polaroid photo was fully closed, the simulation suggested that the person inside most likely deliberately closed the door after Laura entered to block outside visibility while the incident unfolded. The next reconstruction step focused on simulating the movement of the body from inside the house to Ethan's vehicle. Based on the identified gap in the timeline, the team assessed that removing the body from the house needed to be quick, quiet, and leave no easily detectable traces. Gravity and spatial models of the house indicated the body could have been dragged or carried out the rear door, which was the most secluded compared to other exits, then taken to Ethan's vehicle parked either in the garage or close to the backyard, depending on how he positioned the car that day. Since the scene showed no drag marks or blood traces, the simulation indicated the body was likely placed in a soft container or wrapped in thick fabric to avoid direct traces. This matched the discovery of microscopic fabric fragments and a button at the hunting cabin that did not belong to the cabin's interior, suggesting some material may have been used during body transport. When the team ran the time simulation, they determined that if the restraint was quick and moving the body to the vehicle took no more than 5 minutes, the entire process fit perfectly within Ethan's unaccounted-for time window. The next part of the reconstruction process involved simulating the route to the hunting cabin, the primary suspected location. When the shortest route was entered into simulation software, with limited lighting conditions, lower average speed due to dirt roads, and the terrain characteristics of the Appalachian forest, the simulation showed the trip from the Caldwell home to the nearest cabin lasted within the established unaccounted time window. This reinforced the likelihood that Ethan's vehicle did in fact travel to the cabin area that night, consistent with the soil found under the vehicle. The team continued by simulating the movement of the body from the vehicle into the cabin. The hunting cabin Ethan once owned was small, sparsely furnished, and completely isolated from main roads, making it feasible to bring a body inside without attracting attention. Physical models showed the cabin door was wide enough to admit a heavy object, and the interior area, especially where compacted soil was found, matched the placement of a body for a short period. Uneven deep compression marks on the side of the cabin were also simulated to determine if they were consistent with a heavy object being set down multiple times. Results showed the compression distribution was compatible with an unfixed heavy object moved within a narrow range. At the same time, the simulation indicated that if the body was left in the cabin for a period before Ethan departed the area, the absence of serious structural damage was entirely possible because the wooden construction absorbed impact well and would show few new marks from light collisions. The final simulation step of the reconstruction focused on Ethan's return journey home and the final actions before he called 911. When all data was re-entered, the simulation software showed Ethan had sufficient time to return home, turn off lights, turn them back on at the time neighbors recorded, and compose himself to report his wife missing in a worried but undisturbed state. This matched real data. The Caldwell home showed no chaos, no signs of frantic searching, and no evidence of struggle in main areas. The complete simulation of the disappearance night, when all data from in-home behavior, body transport process, and route to the hunting cabin were combined, formed a seamless scenario compatible with every piece of physical evidence discovered during the reinvestigation, particularly the soil under the vehicle, microscopic fabric at the cabin, soil compression, and contradictions in Ethan's original statements. After completing the disappearance night reconstruction and creating the highest probability movement model based on real data, the investigation team moved to the critical phase, linking the entire chain of evidence obtained from multiple sources: the cabin, Ethan's vehicle, Polaroid photos, the shoe on the trail, and Emily Weaver's statement to assess the degree of connection between each detail and determine whether they converged into a single unified criminal pattern. The chain linking began with the hunting cabin, the central point of suspicion confirmed by compacted soil, microscopic fabric, and a button not belonging to the cabin interior. Findings there showed the cabin was not only connected, but likely played a role in the sequence of events surrounding Laura Caldwell's disappearance. When the cabin was correlated with the soil sample taken from under Ethan's vehicle, the team found an almost perfect mineral structure match between the cabin soil and the soil on the vehicle, reinforcing the inference that Ethan's vehicle traveled to the cabin during the time the victim went missing. Next, microscopic fabric fibers taken from Ethan's vehicle interior that matched Laura's DNA created an additional direct link between the victim and the suspect's means of transportation. Although the fibers could not be precisely timed, their presence in low-contact areas suggested Laura was in the vehicle at a time Ethan did not report. When these two evidence groups were placed in the same chain, the cabin became a key point in the body transport journey, while Ethan's vehicle was the transport method, fully consistent with the reconstruction simulations performed earlier. After connecting the cabin and the vehicle, the team moved to cross-referencing the 1998 Polaroid crime scene photos. Digitization and analysis of the rear door handle position showed the door was completely closed and showed no signs of being opened in the time frame immediately before police arrived at the house. This contradicted Ethan's statement that he was not sure if the back door was locked and that Laura might have gone out. Image analysis proved the open door hypothesis had no basis and reinforced the assessment that the story Ethan gave the night he reported her missing may have been staged to create the impression the victim left voluntarily. When this detail was linked with Laura's DNA fabric fibers in Ethan's vehicle, the evidence chain indicated Laura did not exit through the back door, but was likely subdued inside the house before being moved by vehicle. Next, the team integrated data about the shoe found on the trail into the overall evidence chain. The absence of accompanying footprints, lack of surface soil disturbance, and location inconsistent with Laura's movement habits indicated this evidence was likely placed to mislead. When the shoe was placed into the overall model, the team found that the appearance of evidence suggesting the victim walked into the woods matched a staging scenario designed to draw police attention away from the cabin and the area the vehicle may have traveled to. When this detail was cross-referenced with the Polaroid showing a closed rear door and Ethan's statements emphasizing the possibility Laura went outside, the team noted an unusual alignment between the misplaced evidence and the narrative Ethan directed police toward the night he reported her missing. The final evidence group incorporated into the chain was Emily Weaver's statement. When Emily confirmed the romantic relationship with Ethan and provided information about statements expressing a desire to escape family pressure shortly before Laura disappeared, the team gained additional motive data. Statements such as "everything will change soon" and "resolve it thoroughly" were viewed as indicators of Ethan's psychological state, consistent with a criminal pattern aimed at eliminating the legal wife to clear the way for a new relationship. When Emily's statement was linked with the cabin, where Ethan once called it "the only place I can think clearly," and with the physical evidence at the cabin, the team completed another critical link in the reasoning chain. When all data was synthesized, a complete criminal model began to take shape. Laura returned home. The incident occurred inside the house. The body was moved to the vehicle. The vehicle traveled to the cabin. The cabin showed compression marks, fabric fragments, and related evidence. The shoe was placed to create a false investigative direction. Ethan's statements led police toward Raymond Baylor, and finally contradictions between statements, physical evidence, travel route, all converged on Ethan as the source of the staging chain. Once the criminal model was established, the investigation team noted in the report that the previously scattered evidence now connected consistently and logically, forming a sufficiently strong foundation to proceed to the step of preparing an arrest warrant request, including legal argument minutes, evidence comparison tables, and a linear interpretive model of the entire event chain. After the complete criminal model was established and the entire evidence chain was linked into a logical structure, the investigation team forwarded the report to the Kanawha County Prosecutor's Office to evaluate the feasibility of arresting Ethan Caldwell. The assigned prosecutor reviewed each evidence group, from physical evidence at the hunting cabin, soil under the vehicle, microscopic fibers bearing Laura's DNA, Polaroid analysis results, shoe staging indicators, to Emily Weaver's statement, while cross-referencing them with Ethan's timeline, lacking an alibi. After multiple working sessions, the prosecutor determined that, although the circumstantial evidence chain lacked a body, it was strong enough to prove Ethan's direct involvement in Laura's disappearance, especially since the physical findings and witness statements all pointed in the same direction. with no data capable of excluding Ethan's role. A legal petition was drafted, detailing the evidence chain analysis, event reconstruction model, and argument that Ethan had motive, opportunity, and means to commit the act. This document was submitted to the county judge for approval of an arrest warrant in accordance with proper procedure. After reviewing the entire file, the judge signed the arrest warrant for Ethan Caldwell on charges related to the suspicious disappearance of his wife, paving the way for direct law enforcement action. Immediately after the warrant was signed, the investigation team coordinated with the sheriff's office arrest unit to execute a safe approach plan. Ethan, who at that time was living in a new house not far from Charleston, was surveilled for several days to ensure the arrest would occur when he was home alone, minimizing risk to others. Once the appropriate moment was identified early in the morning, the arrest team approached the area, surrounding it from 3 directions to ensure Ethan had no chance to leave before the warrant was served. Police knocked according to procedure, clearly announced their identity and purpose, then ordered Ethan to exit the house. Ethan appeared surprised but did not resist, standing still as he was handcuffed and informed of his Miranda rights. While being escorted to the patrol car, Ethan asked the reason for the arrest, but was given no detailed information beyond the general charge related to Laura Caldwell's disappearance. Upon arrival at the interrogation room, Ethan remained calm and clearly expressed his desire to deny all allegations. When asked about the hunting cabin, Ethan denied visiting the location around the time of the disappearance and claimed the soil under the vehicle could have stuck from an old trip, though he could not explain why the cabin was found to have new evidence matching the victim's disappearance time frame. When confronted with the DNA microscopic fabric data from Laura in his own vehicle, Ethan countered that the vehicle had transported Laura's belongings, yet he could not specify a time or provide a reasonable explanation for the fibers being in low-contact interior areas. When police mentioned Emily Weaver's statement, Ethan rejected it, claiming the conversations were misunderstood and insisting he had no motive to harm his wife. However, Ethan's denials did not alter the fact that his statements continued to contradict the data collected during the reopened investigation. When the interrogation shifted to the most critical question, where Laura Caldwell might be, Ethan became completely uncooperative. He repeatedly stated he didn't know anything, was not involved, and refused to provide any information about the possibility Laura was harmed or where the body might be found. The team noted that this attitude was identical to Ethan's reaction during the 1998 investigation, continuing to evade questions aimed at determining the victim's location. Although the interrogation lasted many hours, Ethan maintained his denial, offering no new explanations or useful information to clarify the case. All data obtained during the session was recorded in the minutes, accompanied by the investigator's preliminary assessment that Ethan showed no signs of cooperation or assistance in determining Laura Caldwell's status. With the arrest warrant executed and Ethan Caldwell detained pending further legal proceedings, the case moved into the next legal phase based on the fully linked evidence chain. After Ethan Caldwell was arrested and placed in a holding cell pending further interrogation, the investigation team proceeded to conduct the formal interrogation in accordance with the procedure applied to reopened cold cases that have sufficiently strong evidence to move into the prosecution phase. In the first interrogation session, following the execution of the arrest warrant, Ethan was brought into the interview room. His hands were not cuffed, but he remained under constant supervision by 2 detectives and 1 officer handling audio-video recording. From the moment the interrogation began, Ethan displayed a more reserved and hardened demeanor compared to the earlier questioning on the day of his arrest. When the detective read him his right to remain silent and his right to an attorney, Ethan nodded in acknowledgement, but showed no emotional reaction whatsoever. When the first question was asked, requesting that Ethan describe in full detail everything that happened on the afternoon Laura disappeared in 1998, Ethan remained completely silent. He did not answer, did not refuse, and simply sat back in his chair with his gaze averted from the detectives. After a prolonged period of silence, the detective shifted to presenting groups of evidence in detail to provoke a response: soil samples from under the vehicle, matching the hunting cabin area, fibers belonging to Laura, found in low-contact areas of the vehicle interior. The Polaroid photograph showing the rear door fully closed, the shoe deliberately placed on the trail, and Emily Weaver's testimony regarding Ethan's statements and behavior prior to the disappearance. However, even as the evidence was laid out sequentially in a logical buildup, Ethan maintained his complete silence. Occasionally, he would only close his eyes and sigh, as if trying to stay calm or weighing his response strategy. But he absolutely refused to provide any information, regardless of whether the detective's tone shifted from firm to conciliatory. When the detective mentioned the hunting cabin, previously owned by Ethan, and asked whether he had returned there on the day Laura disappeared, Ethan looked up but still said nothing. His silence was recorded as deliberate non-cooperation, rather than lack of understanding, since Ethan clearly focused on each question, yet chose not to respond. In another approach, the detective switched to narrower, more specific questions instead of asking for a chronological account of events. For example, did you drive to the hunting cabin area between time X and time Y? Can you explain why Laura's DNA was found in your vehicle? Do you have any explanation for the soil sample match? Why does your statement about the rear door contradict the Polaroid photo? Ethan, however, continued his silence. One detective tried a psychological interrogation tactic, mentioning that Laura's family had gone without answers for more than 16 years, and asking whether Ethan wanted to help give them some information. Ethan showed no reaction, merely twirling two fingers lightly under the table in a repetitive unconscious motion. When the interrogation moved to more direct questions about Laura's body, the detective asked plainly, "Can you tell us where Laura is? Can you confirm she is at the cabin or in the surrounding area? Are you willing to show us the location where she is?" Ethan looked down at the table and remained completely silent. The investigation team's notes recorded that, whenever the body was mentioned, Ethan exhibited slight physical reactions, clenching his fists, but he still said nothing. This led the team to assess that Ethan fully understood the focus of the questions, but was deliberately avoiding answers to minimize legal damage. When the detective brought up Emily Weaver's testimony, particularly the statements expressing a desire to completely change everything, Ethan for the first time looked directly at the detective, yet the silence persisted. He neither denied nor confirmed nor disputed any detail. This reaction was documented as deliberate caution, clearly demonstrating a strategy of silence rather than addressing individual accusations. The interrogation lasted more than 3 hours, but yielded virtually no new data. Ethan provided no answers, no rebuttals, and no request to correct any part of the allegations. When asked if he wished to say anything at all related to the disappearance, or where Laura might be found, Ethan spoke exactly one sentence during the entire session: "I have nothing to say." This single, brief response reinforced the assessment that Ethan had chosen a strategy of absolute silence. Afterward, Ethan requested that an attorney be present for all future interrogations. The record noted that throughout the entire post-arrest interrogation, Ethan was uncooperative, did not answer questions related to the events of the case, and in particular provided no information that could help locate Laura Caldwell's body. The interrogation concluded without obtaining any new data. But Ethan's silence was regarded as a factor reflecting his evasion of responsibility and was included in the report as part of the suspect behavior evaluation. After the post-arrest interrogations yielded no new information, and Ethan Caldwell steadfastly remained silent regarding the location of Laura's body, the Kanawha County Prosecutor's Office proceeded to the next prosecutorial step, filing a formal indictment with the county court charging first-degree murder, along with aggravating circumstances related to concealment of the body, staging of the scene, and providing false statements during the 1998 investigation. The indictment was drafted based on the entire chain of established evidence, including forensic analysis of physical evidence, witness statements, simulation data, and inconsistencies in Ethan's prior statements. When the indictment was presented in court, Ethan saw for the first time the complete compilation of the legal case against him, from the hunting cabin, soil samples, microscopic fibers, the shoe placed on the trail, to the conclusion that Raymond Baylor had been a fabricated suspect. Ethan's defense attorney received the indictment and immediately requested time to review it. But the prosecutor emphasized that the total body of circumstantial evidence was strong enough to proceed to trial, and that the office was prepared to move forward if the defense offered no response. Faced with the prospect of a trial that could result in a life sentence, Ethan began to change his stance. After several days of private discussions with his attorney, Ethan informed them that he wanted to meet with the prosecutor to discuss a deal. The prosecutor agreed to receive the proposal and scheduled a formal meeting attended by Ethan's attorney and the lead detective on the case. During the meeting, Ethan, through his attorney, expressed willingness to negotiate a reduced sentence in exchange for providing information the investigation had been unable to obtain, specifically the location of Laura Caldwell's body. The prosecutor confirmed that providing this information would not guarantee dismissal of charges, but could be considered a mitigating factor in sentencing. Ethan remained silent for a long time before beginning to speak, and for the first time since his arrest, he admitted that he knew where Laura was buried. Without further description, Ethan asked for paper and a pen and began sketching a rough map, marking an area deep inside the Kanawha forest, several miles north of the hunting cabin. When detectives asked for precise coordinates, Ethan said he did not remember them exactly, but described the location using natural landmarks, a narrow dirt track, a large oak tree that had been struck by lightning and broken before 1998, and a low-lying area near a dry creek bed. Ethan stated that was where he buried Laura's body on the night she disappeared, after moving the body from the cabin to that location to reduce the chance the cabin would be searched. Detectives immediately asked Ethan to provide as much detail as possible about the route, how to access the area, and the burial depth. Ethan described the burial spot as approximately 20 meters off the trail, beneath soft soil and leaf litter. He also noted that at the time, the area had not yet been logged, so the tree cover was denser than it is now. While Ethan described the location, detectives recorded everything in the minutes and asked him to mark the spot again on a topographic map the team had brought. Ethan marked an oval-shaped area and added that the exact spot is slightly northwest of the marked location. After he finished, Ethan's attorney reminded everyone that his client was providing the information on the condition that the prosecutor consider recommending a lighter sentence within the limits allowed by law. The prosecutor acknowledged the request, but made no specific commitment, stating only that any mitigation would be considered after Laura's body was recovered and the information Ethan provided was verified. Detectives asked Ethan to confirm one final time that the information was accurate, and Ethan nodded, saying, "I've told you everything I remember." The coordinates, terrain description, and access route were compiled that same day and forwarded in an urgent report to prepare for a field search in the Kanawha forest based on the new statement. After detectives recorded the coordinates and description of the burial site provided by Ethan Caldwell, the West Virginia Cold Case Unit immediately launched the field operation. A forensic team specializing in excavating remains in forested areas was mobilized, accompanied by the detectives who had worked on reconstructing the case and a terrain survey expert to ensure accurate location of the described area. Upon reaching the Kanawha forest, the team cross-referenced the topographic map and the natural landmarks Ethan had described, the most notable being the lightning-struck oak and the dry creek bed near the low-lying area. Although the landscape had changed after more than 16 years, the forensic team quickly identified a large oak with a longitudinal crack in the trunk that matched the description of a lightning-struck tree, and its position aligned with the direction Ethan had indicated. From the oak, the survey team measured the distance in the direction Ethan specified, crossing thick leaf litter and the humus-rich soil typical of the Kanawha forest. Upon reaching the low-lying area near the dry creek, forensic technicians began scanning the ground for anomalies using magnetometers and probing rods. After about 20 minutes of scanning, they detected a spot with soil compaction different from the surrounding area, an unusually thick layer of leaf litter, and uneven ground elevation. These were classic signs of ground that had once been disturbed and then refilled. Once detectives confirmed this matched Ethan's information, the forensic team began carefully removing the surface leaf layer with soft tools to avoid disturbing the underlying soil. When the leaf cover was cleared, the surface soil appeared darker and looser than the surrounding ground, another indication it had been excavated. The team used small shovels to remove thin layers of soil, documenting depth and soil conditions at each stage. At a depth of approximately 30 to 35 centimeters, their tools struck a hard, irregularly shaped object. Soil was gently brushed aside, revealing a long bone lying horizontally beneath the surface. The forensic team leader signaled to stop mechanical digging and switched to finer instruments to prevent damage to the bone structure. Within minutes, they confirmed it was part of a long bone, most likely a foot or ankle bone, still connected to the upper leg bone. As the excavation area was expanded, additional ribs, arm bones, and smaller spinal segments were uncovered. The position and orientation of the bones indicated the body had been buried on its side, without thick fabric wrapping, and the skeletal elements remained relatively intact due to the stable moist soil conditions of the forest. Deeper in the excavation, the team recovered a remnant piece of fabric beneath the damp soil. Though largely decomposed, the weave structure was sufficient to identify it as coming from a thin shirt or pants. In addition, a small metal ring, women's style, was found near the wrist bones. The ring was covered in a thin layer of oxidation, but its distinctive design was still recognizable. This item was immediately sealed because it was highly likely to belong to Laura Caldwell. After the entire skeleton was excavated, the bones were laid out on clean, sterile-lined ground to document their arrangement and state of decomposition. Forensic examiners inspected each bone group to assess the stage of decay, natural wear, and to check for any signs of perimortem trauma on the bone surfaces. Some long bones showed natural longitudinal cracking due to long-term decomposition, with no cuts or fractures indicative of strong external force. This was consistent with the body having been buried shortly after death without prolonged violent transport. The skeletal remains were collected according to protocol and placed in specialized transport containers for transfer to the forensic laboratory. In the lab, each bone was cleaned with a special solution and then air-dried for microscopic structural examination. The examiner determined that the age of the skeleton at the time of death matched Laura Caldwell's age in 1998. In addition to bone analysis, accompanying items were examined. The fabric fragment was preliminarily analyzed under a microscope, revealing synthetic fiber construction common in women's clothing from the late 1990s. The metal ring was cleaned and compared to the description in Laura's 1998 missing person file, which noted she wore a thin, bright metal ring with a small bead-like chain pattern. The recovered ring had an identical design. Finally, the most critical step for identity confirmation was dental analysis. Although all soft tissue had completely decomposed, several teeth and part of the lower jaw remained intact enough for comparison with Laura Caldwell's dental records, which her family had provided during the original investigation. When the tooth structure, enamel cracks, and the position of two fillings were compared, the examiner concluded there was a complete match between the dental sample from the remains and Laura's records. The identity confirmation report was completed the same day, stating that the skeletal remains excavated in the Kanawha forest were the remains of Laura Caldwell, who disappeared in 1998. The trial of Ethan Caldwell took place at the Kanawha County Circuit Court under intense public attention, as Laura Caldwell's disappearance had remained unsolved for more than 16 years before being cracked through a complex chain of evidence and the eventual recovery of her remains in the Kanawha forest. On the very first day of trial, the prosecutor presented the indictment, listing every piece of technical evidence gathered during the reopened investigation: the Polaroid analysis showing the rear door completely closed, forensic results from Ethan's vehicle, including soil samples matching the hunting cabin area and fibers carrying Laura's DNA, physical evidence from the cabin, including microscopic fabric fragments and a button that did not belong to the interior, timeline data, showing Ethan had no alibi for the exact period that matched the simulated route, and all items recovered from the burial site. The prosecution also demonstrated the digital enhancement process of the Polaroid photograph, explaining how modern technology had clarified the detail of the rear door handle, a direct piece of evidence that completely refuted Ethan's 1998 statement. They stressed that a fully closed rear door meant Laura never left the house after returning home, directly contradicting Ethan's description that she might have gone for a walk or left on her own. Forensic experts then testified before the jury about the analyses from Ethan's vehicle. Soil, collected from underneath the car, was compared to multiple locations, and the results confirmed the only match was the area around the hunting cabin, formerly owned by Ethan. The prosecution particularly emphasized that this type of soil could not have appeared if the vehicle had only been driven around the house or on regular streets. Meanwhile, microscopic fibers bearing Laura's DNA were found in concealed areas of the vehicle interior, locations that could only have occurred if Laura had been inside the car, despite no record of her ever using that vehicle prior to her disappearance. Next, the prosecutor presented the simulated sequence of body transport. Laura returned home in the afternoon, was subdued inside the house, moved out through the rear door to the car, taken to the hunting cabin, and later buried deep in the forest. The simulation was shown through computer graphics, demonstrating that the entire chain of events perfectly aligned with real timestamps, including fading daylight, travel time from the house to the cabin, and from the cabin to the burial site. As the simulation played, the jury saw how all the once scattered pieces of evidence fit together into a single logical sequence. The prosecution then detailed the initial staging, the shoe deliberately placed on the trail with no footprints around it, a location inconsistent with natural walking direction, and Ethan's repeated mentions of Raymond Baylor during the 911 call and 1998 interviews, which were analyzed as deliberate attempts to misdirect the investigation. Detectives explained that no evidence placed Raymond anywhere near the Caldwell home on the day Laura disappeared, underscoring the creation of a false suspect, an essential step in the crime model presented by the prosecution. When the prosecution's case moved to witness testimony, Emily Weaver was called to the stand. Emily admitted in open court that she had been romantically involved with Ethan before Laura disappeared, and recounted several vague but heavily suggestive statements Ethan had made, such as "everything will change soon," and "I want to resolve my problems once and for all." Emily also testified that Ethan had described the hunting cabin as the place where he could think clearly, which matched its role as an intermediate location in the reconstructed sequence. Emily's presence in court was a critical part of the motive argument, and the prosecution stressed that Ethan's desire to eliminate Laura in order to pursue a new relationship provided a clear motive for the crime. In addition, the lead detective from the excavation detailed the process of locating the body, from the lightning-struck oak to the dry creek bed, from the distinctive compacted soil to each step of the manual digging. He described how bones emerged, the decomposed fabric remnants, and the ring that was recovered, emphasizing that unearthing the body, exactly where Ethan had described it, constituted definitive proof that his post-indictment statement was accurate and that Laura had been buried there the very night she disappeared. The forensic odontologist further proved the remains belonged to Laura by comparing dental records. The position of two fillings and enamel characteristics matched perfectly. They concluded that the victim's identity was certain, with no possibility of error. The prosecutor closed by stating that the entire chain of physical evidence, witness testimony, technical analysis, and forensic findings all interconnected into one consistent crime model in which Ethan Caldwell had motive, means, opportunity, and had staged the entire scene to mislead investigators for more than 16 years. The prosecution told the jury that the successful recovery of Laura's body was the final confirmation of the entire investigation. When the trial moved to the deliberation day, the entire jury was instructed to retire to the jury room to consider all evidence presented throughout Ethan Caldwell's trial. They took with them transcripts of witness testimony, simulation charts, digitally enhanced Polaroid images, forensic reports, excavation documentation, and the prosecution's presentation of the fully connected crime model. Deliberations lasted many hours, during which jury members analyzed each category of evidence, one by one, inconsistencies in Ethan's 1998 statements, the soil match to the hunting cabin, Laura's DNA fibers in Ethan's vehicle, signs of staging with the shoe, Emily Weaver's testimony revealing romantic motive, and the forensic confirmation that the excavated remains were indeed Laura Caldwell. No piece of evidence contradicted any other, everything pointed in the same direction. When they returned to the courtroom, the jury foreman handed the verdict form to the judge. Tension filled the room as the judge read the final conclusion aloud. Ethan Caldwell was found guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment. The announcement silenced the courtroom. Ethan maintained an unreadable expression, staring straight ahead, showing neither resistance nor remorse. The judge then proceeded to sentencing, emphasizing that the case had caused suffering for more than 16 years, leaving a painful void for the victim's family, and that Ethan's staging of the scene, false accusations, and long-term concealment of the body constituted particularly egregious conduct. The sentence pronounced was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, in accordance with the penalty framework for first-degree murder in West Virginia. The decision was based on the combination of aggravating factors, personal motive, concealment of the body, deliberate misdirection of the investigation, and the prolonged duration of the deception. As the judge struck the gavel to close the trial, the lead prosecutor bowed in thanks to the jury and stated that this outcome was the result of a lengthy reinvestigation requiring coordination among multiple forensic units, investigative teams, and modern technology. On the other side, Ethan was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs by 2 officers and taken to the facility where he would serve his life sentence. As he left, he cast one brief glance toward the area where Laura's family was seated, but none of them returned the look. After the verdict, the West Virginia Cold Case Unit held an internal debriefing to summarize the entire resolution process and extract key lessons for other pending cases. In the final report, they identified 5 critical factors that led to the successful resolution. The first was the ability to digitize and reanalyze old Polaroid photographs, revealing the rear door status, technology that did not exist in 1998, but directly disproved Ethan's original statement. The second was advances in microscopic DNA analysis, which detected Laura's fibers in Ethan's vehicle, evidence that established the victim's presence in the suspect's car. The third was mineralogical soil analysis, a technique virtually unused during the original investigation. The soil under the vehicle proved the trip to the cabin that Ethan had concealed. The fourth was Emily Weaver's new testimony, providing crucial motive data and Ethan's suspicious statements before Laura disappeared. Though witness-based, it served as the bridge connecting motive, movement, and use of the cabin as an intermediate point. The fifth, and decisive factor, was Ethan's disclosure of the body's location after formal indictment. Despite remaining silent in all prior interrogations, the need to negotiate a reduced sentence forced him to provide information investigators could not reconstruct on their own. The successful excavation not only confirmed the tragic truth, but also validated the entire crime model rebuilt during the reopened investigation. The Cold Case Unit concluded that the combination of modern forensic techniques, multi-source analysis, and persistent re-examination of every old detail was the key to closure. They noted this case as a prime example that seemingly unsolvable files can still be resolved when technology advances and new information emerges. The report ended by affirming that bringing the perpetrator to justice was not only the closure of a cold case, but also a reminder that no matter how much time passes, a disappearance can still be solved when evidence is re-examined with new tools and investigative determination. In today's United States, where the legal system, forensic technology, and community support networks continue to improve, the Laura Caldwell case offers very real lessons about vigilance, the power of science, and the importance of never overlooking small details. In this story, the shoe deliberately placed on the trail, the rear door still closed in the Polaroid, and the soil under Ethan's vehicle, details that seemed minor and not important enough in 1998, ultimately became the keys that unlocked the case 16 years later. This reminds us that in real life, even the smallest signs of abnormality in family dynamics, personal relationships, or surroundings can carry critical meaning. American society today sees many cases of domestic violence and toxic relationships hidden behind the facade of a happy family, just as Ethan appeared to the community before the truth came out. Emily Weaver's testimony, warning about Ethan's vague but threatening statements, is a lesson that if you hear or witness words or behavior that make you fear for someone's safety, do not ignore it. Find a way to report it to authorities or someone who can help. The story also highlights the power of modern U.S. forensic technology. Old Polaroids, microscopic fibers, soil samples, all can become powerful evidence as science progresses. This encourages the public to always report incidents promptly, preserve information, and cooperate with investigators, because what cannot be solved today may be clarified tomorrow. Finally, the greatest lesson is this: the truth can remain hidden for a very long time, but justice, when pursued with persistence, science, and the courage to speak the truth, will not disappear. Thank you for following this entire 16-year journey to solve the case. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring mysterious cases brought to light through perseverance and the power of justice.